Hello everyone, have you seen Ronin? If not, stop watching now, go and watch it, then come back to me. Right, if you're still with me, I'll assume that you have, in which case you'll know all about this. The car of choice if you have to escape from a very well-driven Citroen. This is a 2000-ish Audi S8, a platform name D2. This is Audi's very own S8, something they've actually only recently acquired. Unlike many of their vehicles in their press fleet, this car has quite a few miles on it. In fact, just shy of 160,000. I've been trying to get my hands on this particular car for a little while, but it's had a couple of bits of work done to it, and now it is ready for me to enjoy. What makes the S8 so special, other than its starring role in that brilliant film? Well, the A8 of this generation, and therefore the S8, were the first cars to use the Audi space frame. The second car, you may recall, is the A2, which I've reviewed previously, and two more different cars you could not possibly imagine. In both cars, the point of using an aluminium frame was to try and save weight. Audi's bosses realised that their cars, having all-wheel drive as standard at a time when that was unusual, were a bit heavier than the competition. And being heavier will affect performance in nearly all ways. It will be slower to 60, it'll be worse on fuel, etc, etc. So they thought by developing this lovely chassis they can save back some of the weight that the all-wheel drive system has cost them. And this was designed to be a bit of a technological tour de force. This was a car to sort of bring Audi into the 90s. Now this car Audi have picked because it is very, very well specified, and it has some beautiful period options that I hope you're going to enjoy looking at. Now, under the bonnet, and we'll have a look at it in a moment, is a 4.2 litre V8, producing in facelift trim a fairly modest 360 PS. Earlier cars were about the 340 mark. This car does not have NOS, as per the film. Note also that film introduced the concept of NOS long before The Fast and the Furious and other such uncouth things. Now, one thing that I pointed out on this car to our host and was quickly corrected about was this wing mirror. So, Mr. Darren, if you come in close and you show the boys and girls at home, I thought this was a hideous, nasty, chrome-wrapped wing mirror. I was very, very wrong. This is, in fact, real aluminium. You can tell because it is ruddy cold. The car's also got a couple of marks here and there, which you'll never notice or see, but overall, it's in pretty honest condition, I think is the best way to describe it, and that is how Audi wanted it. Now, quite frankly, by far the coolest option on this car is this. I've always heard of these, and I've never ever seen one specified. This is the solar sunroof option. Now, it doesn't do anything particularly fancy, but what it does is it provides the car with just enough power that on a hot day it'll keep the fans in the car going. So there is a constant flow of cool air in the vehicle, meaning that when you come to your car on a roasting hot day, you will not be incinerated when you sit on the leather seats. Now you've got these big, chunky alloys, which are only 18 inches. Again, very modest by today's standards. Perhaps more impressively, you have an absolutely cavernous boot. Come ye, good sir. I mean, seriously, look how it's a whole torso. You can get, I would say, 3 torsos in here, like stretched out. Maybe 6 if you stack them or they're small. It's an excellent car for drug dealers, rogues, and all sorts of other types that need to be fast, but they've also got practicality to think about. It being an 8, of course, it's still a fairly luxury car. We also love the little GPS tracker that's here on the back. I mean, look at that, it's always been painted as well. How wonderful and beautiful. This colour is a special order one, and I added up the cost of all of the options on this car from new, and this car was basically base £64,000, with options 70 grand. Some of those other options include things like the rear roller blind and side blinds. So if you've got your, drug dealing boss in the back, he can't be seen by rival gangs. There's a reasonable amount of legroom in here, although this is not, by the looks of it, the long wheelbase version. And this is another vehicle where I wish you could just smell what I smell, because this car smells like it's been owned by a man who has his very own successful fax machine company. It's brilliant. Anyway, as is traditional with these things, there is copious amounts of wood or woodish everywhere. You've got bits of aluminium too, mixed in with a bunch of buttons which are very odd. They're very odd because they seem to be from two different eras. You see, these all look like relatively modern Audi, really. They're not radically different from that in Darren's B7 RS4 or the R8. But then if you take a look at the seat memory buttons in the side of the door, they appear to be straight out of the 1980s. One thing I also really do quite love is the armrests. You've got one for each seat. That's pretty cool. And you've got your own individual storage, so you don't have... Oh, now that is fantastic. That is the phone prep, and that honestly just shortened my life expectancy by about 3 months. Oh, you know in The Matrix when he had the phone and he picks it up and it just opens itself, and I was devastated as like a 12-year-old boy to find out that, you know, there wasn't really a phone that actually did that. That's just... My life's complete now. I'm done. Oh, you've got hidden controls down here, and I don't know, there's a little metal base in here which could be magnetic or it could be heated or cool or something like that. The nav system is pretty old school. Dials are all quite nice, and while we're here, I suppose we should have a look at that mighty engine. Now here it is, the belly of the beast. Not just a 4.2 litre V8, but one with 5 valves per cylinder as well. It comes in that era when Audi were quite obsessed with that. I love the little air filters here. They're not for the engine, because the engine's airbox is over there. They are, I think, cabin air filters. Note also how the entire block is forward of the axle line. The axle is here. So that's a very, very front-heavy setup. However, what's most important to most of you, and for me indeed, is how this car drives. And there's only one way to discover that. Now, although for you at home it may have already been a couple of days, for me it's only about 10 minutes since I stepped out of the R8 GT. And it's hard to think of a car more different from this. Descending into these seats, I'm just wrapped in this blanket of luxury and dead cow. It's absolutely magnificent. In fact, Darren, my man behind the camera, I think put it best that after a Sunday blast in the GT, this is the perfect car to take the family to Sunday lunch. Now, perhaps the best thing that I can draw comparisons with in this car is my own Mercedes S500. It's of a very similar era. It also has a large capacity V8, although that one at 5 litres puts out only 300 horsepower. It'd probably be more fair to compare the S55 with this, but I haven't driven one of those, so I can't. This does have that same sort of feeling as the Mercedes though, of just a large engine pulling you along with relative ease. Pulling away from junctions is just so delightfully easy. And it's stuff like that that reminds me how much better cars used to be in many ways. I'm sure many of you will have experienced the annoyance of trying to pull away in a modern car with a turbo engine and a dual clutch gearbox that simply can't make its mind up. You don't have any of that problem in this at all. And it does feel pretty dated in here, and I would say as a luxury proposition it's nowhere near the match of the S-Class of the time. I have driven very briefly a 7 Series of the period, but it was so long ago I really can't draw any sort of comparisons with that at all. If you happen to have a 7 Series and you'd like to see it on the channel, please do let me know at the usual place. In Europe, these were available as standard with a 6-speed manual box. Unfortunately, in the UK, we got the auto. As in my Mercedes, this is a 5-speed unit and it shifts very smoothly, as you would expect it to. I have to say that generally the car is in remarkable fettle for something that's done 160,000 miles. It's very solidly put together indeed. The seat has such an incredible amount of adjustment in it that my 6'2" assistant Darren can set the front end so high that his legs dangle. You do have a little buttons on the wheel to change your own gear, which is an improvement over the Mercedes, in which you more or less can't tell it what gear you want. The car's also got more of an appetite for revs than the Merc, unsurprising given the valve train layout. This has a red line of 7 versus the S500's lowly 6. Steering is kind of slow, but actually does have some feel when you get into a corner. It's very odd, really. It's nowhere near as good or as pointy as the RS2, but it does actually have a little bit of that car's character. It's certainly got a lot of feedback and texture, in fact more so than the R8 LMX that we just drove, which is saying quite a bit. It's of course nowhere near as pointy or sharp as those cars, but responds to steering input much better than you'd expect anything of this weight to do so. Going through town with the armrest set in the proper position, the seats set just right, this thing is just a lovely place to spend some time. I can easily imagine myself crossing Europe in this, and if ever Audi let it out of the fleet for more than a sort of couple of hours or so, I would happily drive it all the way home. And I don't mean my home, I mean its home. I'm not saying that this car is all about the Ronin thing, but driving along little roads like this, I can't but help imagine myself being in the middle of a little car chase. Cue the dramatic music. It's amazing when you drive something at this age with, by today's standard, what is a relatively modest power output, just how much fun you could really have. In fact, going down a road like this, you would think that an S8 would be totally out of its element. And I've driven a much more modern S8. I've driven the one before the current generation, and that one had about 700 horsepower, so double the power output of this. Yet I think it's this one that I'm having a much better time driving. It's quite a thing. And having just driven these roads in a pair of R8s, you'd think that they'd been re-serviced in the intervening hours, but they haven't. This car suspension is working really well, and yes, you've got to steer about twice as much as you did in the R8s and all that jazz, but it's actually properly enjoyable. You know that the people that built this had an awful lot of fun testing it on roads like this, making sure it would do exactly this, safe in the knowledge that very, very few of its owners would ever do something like this. But you know what? I'm kind of glad that they did, because this is a proper Audi. It's well good, isn't it? The brakes aren't. Brakes are a bit scary. Have just come out of a car with massive carbon ceramics, so that I need to remember. You could get yourself into trouble there. The tyres are not as big and as grippy as I'm used to, and that you have to kind of remind yourself, same as with my Merc. Like, it'll go along fast and it'll go around some corners, but its limits are simply not as high as you would be used to. However, with the car's all-wheel drive, the fact that some of these roads aren't quite as good as they could be, it's rained a couple of times today, it's absolutely fine. You're not worried about it being able to put the power down. It's nice and smooth and predictable, and it's actually got a lot more interaction than I thought it might. Power! Now granted, I'm giving it the big one to more or less keep up with that 4-cylinder 1 Series in front that doesn't seem to be driving hard at all. But actually that's what I love, you know. Just being able to drive a car and drive it reasonably hard but still not doing silly speeds. Taking the R8 out this morning was just an exercise in restraint, whereas this is just a bit of a laugh. Why am I saying that about a massive 20-year-old Audi? Because it's true, I guess. Anyway, if you're looking for a big, comfy V8 car that can also play a little bit and has a cool place in cinema history, you could do a lot worse than the D2 generation S8. And I hope you guys have enjoyed watching. Anyway, we're going to keep driving. Please hit the like button, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.